there you go. It's public. It's not being listed as unlisted. I've done that a few times. You think to yourself, I just spent 90 minutes on a live stream and nobody joined because me being a silly sod has put it as unlisted, but this is listed. Oh, we've got now 2 viewers, and I've had a bit of a mad rush to get ready for it. I did manage to. I'm trying to cut some sausages, and I did manage to burn my sausages. I think they're edible. They're not like totally black, so that's. I'm slightly gutted over that. But never mind. It's the way It's the way it goes. So yes, I am indeed. I am Braggy, and I am a Norse pagan, as well as lots of other things. I'm also consider myself to be a shaman as well. I do follow that route of magic, but I quite easily recognise myself as being a Christian from my upbringing. So I don't go to church. I believe my church is outside. As Norse pagans, we love our nature. And I have a couple of comments here from King Edward, the Turbulent Neil, who says, "Ahoy there, Braggy." And then we have a comment here from Grace Elizabeth Hanson, William, and he says, "Hi, you made it at last." Yes, I did promise I'll do a live stream at 6 o'clock, and whilst I'm before I go and do other things tonight, could be any time, I'll do a live stream, and we'll see how long this goes for. And I've got to think about tidying up my table. So I've got, how many weapons have I got on my table? Let's count them. We can count them together. Tiffany, GA509. Oh, hugs back to you. I'm a very huggy person in the real life. If I go down my local pub and I see my friend Martin, the landlord, we always give each other a big hug, because real men and real people hug each other to say hello. And it's an old thing, isn't it? It's a bit like putting your hand out to shake somebody's hand, because what does that fundamentally say about the individual? And why have we been doing hugging and putting our hands out for probably tens of thousands of years? Because when I put my hand out or I hug you, it says that I've got no weapons and therefore I am friendly. And it's such an old thing. I could fairly certain I could offer my services as giving free hugs. I'm sure many people would come and line up, So, and then Grace Elizabeth Hanson says, "Last night I was watching a movie." Well, what film were you watching? I'm currently going through YouTube and watching the TV series from the 80s called Minder, with George Cole and Dennis Waterman. And you've been watching an anime film. Well, our first host, Turkey, is a massive comic and anime fan, and he's also a massive heavy metal fan. In fact, he showed me once his little photograph album of all the tickets of all the bands he's been to in the 70s and 80s, and actually there's some really amazing bands he's been to. It's been a long time since I've been and watched a band. Now, I was going to count all the weapons on the table. We could do this together. Let's have a look. So first of all, we've got a lang sax. We've got a sax, that's number 2. We've got a bolt system with 2 knives on. That's 4. Half a broken sword. That's 5. Another sword, 6. A lang sax, 7. Another knife, 8. Another lang sax, 9. Well, that's more of a sax, 9. A lang sax, 10. And my 2 hands. And a wooden spoon, just in case. Wooden spoons, or spoons that are going to be a wooden spoon, can be very deadly in the right hands. Normally I'm good at chucking things, but not today. So we'll go back. Yes, I did a live stream last night, but for some reason, no matter how many times I tried, I could not get to see the comments. I saw the first 2 comments, and then all the comments after that disappeared. And I don't know what I did wrong, whether it was just Loki deciding to play tricks on us. I've also got a spear here, just in case, or a javelin, just in case those Saxons charge through the longhouse. I could surely throw one of them at my door. The head's come off. They're not passing it on yet. Oh dear. We're flying. Yeah. This is like the dumping ground for when I'm filming. You know, I just dump my weapons on the ground. This is quite a nice sheath, but it needs a whole lot of brass going back and taking apart, and it does have a nice kind of a washer. If you can focus on it, there we go. But it wants to come, and of course the knife is a lot shorter than the actual knife it originally had. So yeah, I have to make a knife just to fit the sheath, I think. A job for another day. You know, but some days I just get randomly bored and I think, oh, well, I got a bit of metal. Let's go and make a sax. And then Grace Elizabeth says, or William, yeah, you have a new video now. Said that something happened to Eggle. Well, Eggle passed away in 2023. So, you know, he got a bad foot. He had gangrene in his foot for some reason. And then he ended up getting sepsis and blood poisoning, and quite, you know, ironically, in the same sense of Egil Skalla-Grimsson, who went blind, he went blind as well with the sepsis and couldn't see. So I was speaking to him over the phone with when his nephew AJ, who sometimes comments on the channel. So if you see AJ Carter, that's Egil's relation and nephew. So yeah, so sadly Egil passed away, and I think a few things contributed to this. I think the COVID whole situation had its little part. You know, won't go much more into that. But I think also the cost of living, even though he's just retired, which is just his luck, he was really struggling to get by and feed himself, and even more so heat his flat. Because I went to see him in the beginning of the year in 23, and his flat was very cold, and you know, it was just sad to see him pass away so suddenly. Really, I had a phone call on a Sunday night from his sister. He said, "I'm really sorry to tell you, Andy, but Simon's passed away." But at the same time, you know, I think when me and Iric had a feeling that something like this was going to happen, because we saw the way he was looking on camera, how gaunt he was towards the end, and he kind of stopped going outside and became isolated. And you know, I tried to help best I could, but I was still dealing with my dad being in hospital at the time and caring for my dad before that. So I found it extremely difficult to get out. But you know, one of the things me and Egil talked about quite a few times was, you know, what should happen to his videos if that did happen. And you know, he said, well, please continue publishing videos of me, please keep my word fame going, because that as a Norse pagan was very important to him. And I think that's partly why over the years I filmed a lot of videos, but I kind of on a subconscious level just, you know, save a lot of those videos so that I had videos in hand. And then I had to think to myself, well, how do we fundamentally publish those videos? What do we do to celebrate Egil without being too morbid? But then again, from a Norse point of view, you know, death is only the beginning. You know, he got cremated, and he took a sword to his little grave they dug, and his favourite cloak, which was very nicely embroidered, and you know, he now most probably rest in. I like to think he rests in Valhalla. I mean, in the modern concept of Norse paganism, you know, you can't exactly die on the battlefield. So how do you, as a Norse pagan, get into Valhalla? And you know, as Egil says, well, you know, you do it through being courageous, and you do it by being honourable and being true to your friends. You know, because we all have battles in our lives to fight, whether they're actual physical battles or actually more mental challenges, and he certainly had that in his life. So for Egil, it was important that he had his memory going on, which is why, you know, I do publish Egil videos, and then I have to decide to myself, well, on what date do we celebrate Egil? Because I was thinking about, you know, having this Egil Thorson Day. I spoke to Iric about it a little bit as well, because when I have something to deal with, or when I'm got to make decisions, I tend to talk to my friends, listen to what they say, and gain more information and more knowledge. And then so I thought to myself, well, do we celebrate his birthday every month, or do we celebrate the 9th? So to me, I kept on thinking, well, the 9th, magical number, 9 world, 9th day of the month. And that is the day when we, in theory, will publish a new unseen video. And I don't always publish an unseen video because I'm trying to prolong it for as long as possible. Because if I publish all the videos in the next 5 years, we're going to run out and there won't be new Eggle videos. So, and there's probably about 10 to 15 years worth if I did one new video in the long form a month, but also included any of the longer short form we recorded, because we was recording 2 to 3 minute videos in the short form before you could have 3-minute videos. So that's what we did, and that's what I decided to do. And I think it is important because, from Eggle's point of view, he really loved being on the channel, and he really loved you guys, because when he read the comments, when you say, oh yeah, it's amazing, we're getting all these views, and, I've been stopped in Derby by people saying, hello, you're that guy from that channel. So he really loved it, and it made his little world. And, the times he was filming, his little face would light up. And even though, I would make him do a 5 or 6 hour filming session, by the time you get to 5 hours, he gets all grumpy. I want to go home now. He was a bit grumpy at times. And, but, so, we've got to be so thankful that he did sit and record all the videos on the runes, on the stories, on the history lessons. And we could have done a lot more, but we could have done a lot less. And I think that's important. And then when I think to myself, well, what if Take passed away, for instance, it'll be very difficult to have a Take day because there isn't really any videos I can publish that's not been seen. So, and that's a little bit sad, really. And I'm sure Take, if he was here, he will tell you some very funny stories about Eggle and all the years he knew him. And, likewise, Take would like to be remembered, but he's still alive and he's battling on, and he works. So let's go back to your comments. Yeah, so some of the most funniest videos that me and Eggle did were the ones where we told folk tales together. So he'll do the funny voices and I'll do the narration, and you can just see me, trying to bite my lip and not laugh my head off, because he was very funny. He was very funny in life. So to go back to your comments, so Through House and 9 says, evening all. Evening, how are you, my friend? How is everybody today and tonight? Let me know how you are. I'm good. And then we have a comment here from Tiffany J509. I'm happy you kept this channel going. Yeah, I mean, I am too. And, when we go back to 2018, after Turkey probably suddenly left the channel at 3 in the morning when he sent me a text, saying, I'm not going to do it no more. I had to decide to myself what to do with the channel. We got 60 plus videos published. Short videos didn't exist back in the day. I started recording videos. I waited a few months, thought about it. I came very close to deleting my channel, but then I thought, well, I'll invite Simon along, and he was well up for it. And that's made the channel what it was, and that is why we are where we are now. And of course, I invited Iwick to come and make a few videos, and hopefully in the future Iwick will be a little bit more settled in his life and have the ability to film, because he's got a lot of knowledge, being a younger Viking. Like, he's my younger brother and I love him to bits. And we never met in real life, but I love the guy to bits, and he's my best friend, and one of very few best friends I have. But don't forget, you guys are also my friends. So a commentator from William Hanson, you don't mind calling you William. So you have looked at the Faroe Islands, looking forward to it. Yes, I have. I think I've probably got about 60 stories I've found so far from the Faroe Islands. They've all been, kind of made into a format where I can tell them. And I've actually recorded the first one yesterday on the seal folk of Magladala, if I think is the right day of pronouncing it. I mean, I could tell you now, but it will be fundamentally ruin the video when it gets published next week if I edit it tonight. But it's a very nice video, and I mean, luckily, because I've got the practice of telling, literally hundreds of videos and stories, even if a little short story. I mean, you could write a story in the comments, 5 or 6 sentences. As long as I can remember it, then I could develop it live on camera into a story, because I just got that ability. Because it's about adding the detail. And because I know the history, I can add the detail. And that's the first time, actually, I've ever recorded a story from the Faroe Islands. And I've had a little bit of a look, and I've watched a couple of videos about the history. And I've also created and covered some of the history aspects of the Faroe Islands as well. So there will be like a story-based history lesson talking about the Faroe Islands history, but within a story concept, which is what I'm developing at the moment on the channel. So you saw this for the first time on Saturday with that story about Ragnarok. I hope you enjoyed that story. I definitely enjoyed telling it. I think I was a little bit enthusiastic on it and too much emphasis. I kind of get that from Turkey. Some days I've got to remember to calm my voice down. I've got a loud voice. God knows what my neighbours think, but I live in a very big house with a very big garden. And, so my next one I got to record is about the lone archer of the Battle of Malden, and of course there's a key character in that called Bright Noth. Is it Bright Noth? And I think at some point this week coming up, I've got hopefully this week I'm going to publish a video which I've made from some comment where I'm talking about the origin of the Boar of Mercia. Because we had a very lovely comment, and the guy was talking about the fact that the reason why we have the boar symbol is, there's a high chance it's because of in the West Mercian Midlands, they had the Legio XX Legion there, and their symbol was the boar. So it kind of it kind of makes you think whether that is the connection. So that's in the bag, ready to be published. I just got to do the thumbnail and so forth. And then Grace says, William says, I live in a town called Gotta. That was just just a spell check. No, spell check is a funny thing at times, especially with Norse names. Like I said, I don't know a great deal until recently, this last few days, about the Faroe Islands. I've heard of them, everybody's heard of the Faroe Islands. I like to go there. I mean, I don't know if it's a place people go on holiday, but I think it would be quite nice to. I'd imagine I don't know if you can get a ferry or whether you can definitely get a plane. That's definitely a way to get there. But I wonder if you can get a ferry there, and then because I do want to travel in the future. And I will have the ability at some point to say to myself, what am I doing next week? Oh, filming, I hope. Oh, let's go somewhere else and film. Oh, Faroe Islands, there we go. Drive up to Scotland, jump on a ferry, whether I'll be camping or buying a bed and breakfast, or my initial plan is to get a kind of a van and convert it into a camper van. I could do that as a series. Viking converts van to camper van, but with a Viking twist. They'll all be Viking themed. Have a big shield wall on the front bumper shield. Then William says, there is a ferry, but only comes from Denmark and Iceland. Well, that'd be a nice excuse to go to Denmark then, wouldn't it, for a few weeks, and then finish up Faroe Islands, go back to Denmark, come back to Northumbria, sail back to Derby. Not from Northumbria. If I sail back from, I'd have to go down the Derwent, wouldn't I? But these days, all the rivers have been altered so much, you couldn't get a long ship down the rivers without massive problems of getting over weirs and bridges and so forth. You know, I think it's a cunning plan to stop us Norse from deciding in Scandinavia to come back and raid England again because we can't get down the rivers because there's too many bridges in the way. Yeah. Yeah, so just bear with me, and then I will at some point in the week record some more stories. I've got so many videos I've got to record in hand. I get ideas in my head all the time. I'm drinking tea, being British, and as I was talking to Iric earlier, you know, I live and breathe this channel. And I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll check my phone. Any more comments? All right, just reply to them, you know. Oh, look all the views we've had. I mean, at the moment, I think we've had 116,000 views in 2 days. I mean, that's really good. We are growing. We're getting to that stage with the shorts content where they're being pushed over 30,000 views. Once you get to that stage, that YouTube really tries to push those videos out and test it with the audience. So for every video, so you get 5 videos and each of those videos get 30,000 views. But it's not the same people seeing those videos, because every time you get a result like that, it's a different 30,000 people that YouTube are sending the video to. And it's all about testing the audience and for YouTube to build up and see, you know, the channel's history and see what sort of people would like the channel. But I like to think that, you know, we're open to everybody, especially with the storytelling. So your favourite story, William, is the one about the witch and the giant. Oh, I'll have to remember that. I'm always happy to record folk tales, you know. I've done it a few times. Like somebody said, oh, can you record the story of the 3 sillies? And it's a classic tale. So back in the medieval times, you know, there was a family and they was very well known for being very stupid and very silly. And they had a daughter and they wanted to marry her off. You know, she was getting to the age where she can get married. And, you know, a man came knocking at the house and, you know, said, you know, I'm one of the men from the village. I've heard, you know, I really like your daughter. You know, I'd like to marry her. So the old man, you know, says, oh, you can marry my daughter, but you got to do 3 things. And he gave him these 3 tasks to do. And so the first one, you know, he had to go and I'm trying to remember the story. It's been a while. So he had to go and find a man who was struggling to get into his trousers. So, you know, he went on a walk and walked a few leagues, a few miles, and he came to this hill and there was a big lone oak tree. And there was a man who has hung his trousers from a tree, and he was trying to jump from the tree into the trousers because that's the way he thought you put trousers on, or breeches, you know. So he kept on climbing up and trying to jump into the trousers and couldn't quite do it. And this young man who wanted to marry this other man's daughter said, that's not how you put trousers on. I said, what do you mean? That's how I've been doing it in my family for years. We hang our trousers from the trees and we jump into them. But I'm not very good at it, as you could see, because no matter how many times he tried, you know, he kept on trying to jump into the trousers from the tree. And, you know, this young man sat down for a while, watched him with quite, you know, laughing his head off. Yeah. That's the funniest thing I've ever seen. And he said, that's not how you put trousers on. And he got the man to lie down. And he says, you lie down and I'll put your trousers on for you. And because the challenge the man gave him said, you got to go and find 3 more sillier people than me, was the thing and the task he had to do. So this was the first one. You heard about this man. This man was probably a legend in the area. The man who tried to jump into trousers. And, you know, he taught him how to put trousers on, and he said, you're a very, very silly man. And then he heard about another farmer who had a big, long house, but he did not have a normal roof, for the roof was made of turf. And he was trying to push a cow up onto the roof because the grass there was very high and very green. And he thought that all cows should go on the top of his roof. And, you know, you're trying to push the cow up. And this young man went along and said, what are you trying to do? I said, oh, you see that roof of mine? Look at the grass on there. It's the best grass in the valley. No cows ever touched it or ate it. And I'm going to push my cow up. And he said, well, that's not what you do. He said, if you go down there, there's a lovely valley and there's loads of lovely grass. It's free land. Just take your cow down there instead of trying to get your cow on the roof. And I'm sure you agree that cows are very big creatures. You know, I've worked with cows. Last thing you want to happen is being kicked by one. And, you know, so there's a man, you know, trying to push the cow up, and this young man kept on. Well, I'm telling a story at the moment from medieval history, but yes, it's about Norse and Anglo-Saxon history, and we also do a few other things as well. So this young man was watching this old man trying to push the cow up onto his roof of his longhouse, and no matter how many times he tried to push the cow up, come on, go onto the roof. You know, he couldn't do it, and in the end, the young man said, "Well, you're the most second silliest person I've met today, and I've only got one more to meet until I can marry the farmer's daughter." And he went off. He heard about this village in the Shire of Snottingham called Gotham or Gotham, depending on how you pronounce it. And he's heard about this village, and everybody probably in the country has, because they are made up from very silly people. In fact, they are well known for being a village of idiots. And I'm not sure whether that's certain today. And one day I've always threatened to go there and do a village tour and hope that I don't get recognised because of the fact that I've told a lot of the tales of the wise men of Gotham or Gotham. And that, of course, where, you know, we have Gotham in the Batman world comes from. It's from that very name. And so he marches off. He's got a nice bag of some bread and cheese, because a lot of people eat bread and cheese on the march. I certainly do as a Norse warrior. And he goes off to this village. And the first thing he sees in the village was a big pond. But all the locals are jumping up and down and getting their mallets of wood and smacking it with their knives. And, you know, he thinks, what are you trying to do? And one of the locals said, "Oh, yeah, there's a big eel in that pond, and we'll be trying to catch it for a long time. And every day we get up and we go in the pond and we smash it with hammers and stab it with knives, and nobody quite catches this eel." And then he goes along to this longhouse, and there's all the local women have got this wagon, and they're washing the wagon up and down this longhouse on the side of the wall, trying to damage the wall. And, you know, they said, what are you doing? He said, "Well, you know, we've heard that the king wants to come down our road, and we know that when the king comes," and this was actually King John from history, "when King John comes down our road, it becomes the king's highway. Well, we have a toll on our road, and we like to charge people a penny to travel, and we do not want the king to come down here. And so we're pretending to be idiots." And that's what put King John from going to Gotham, and that is why it never became part of the king's highway. And that was, you know, and he said, "You know, you lot in the pond and you women over there are the most silliest people I've ever met." And so he met lots of different very silly, idiotic people. And he decides to go back to the longhouse to see the father of the the woman he wants to marry. He said, "I've done my job, I've done my task, and I've met the three most silliest people. First of all, I met that man called Niall, who was trying to jump into his trousers, and I taught him how to wear and put trousers on properly. He was a very silly man. And then, you know, I went along and I met a man with a cow, and he was trying to get his cow on top of a roof of his longhouse. And I said to him, that's the most silliest thing I've seen today, apart from the man with the trying to jump into trousers." And then I went to a village in Nottingham today, Snot Small Farmstead, a collection of 2 villages. And quite interestingly, 1,000 years ago was a lot smaller than Derby. It's a damn shame it's much bigger now, and they get all the money in the Midlands. And so, you know, he goes along and he says to the farmer, I met them at the village in Gotham, and they are very much indeed a village of idiots. Very well known throughout history of being a village of idiots. And I said, "I've done your task. I have met the 3 most silliest people in the whole of Mercia." And the old man said, "Well, in that case, you can marry my daughter." And luckily, they ended up getting married, and that's the end of the tale of the 3 sillies. So we have a commentary from King Edward the Turbulent. It costs just over £100 to travel by ferry from Denmark to the Faroe Islands. I've had a quick look. Well, I'm definitely be doing that. Any excuse to go to Denmark and any excuse to get on a ferry, I'm definitely up for that. And then we have a comment here from Harry Q16S. A very warm welcome to the channel. I am Braggy. I am a historical reenactor of over 30 years. I'm a historian and I'm also a folklorist, so I know a lot about folk tales. And we do many things on the channel, but we talk a lot about weapons like sea axes and larger sea axes, langsaxes. This is a Bretta or broad langsax. We have a flying sax here. We have an Anglo-Saxon style sea axe. What else have we got? And an Anglo-Saxon style langsax or long knife. And of course, we also like our helmets. And I've also got the Coppergate helmet in front of me. I'm sure you agree. Now, I saw this the other day, this little tool from the 19th century, and I'm thinking to myself, actually, I could probably make this into a nice Viking and Saxon knife because the handle is quite nice. You got the brass mountings, so quite acceptable. The shape is completely wrong, but I think if I grind a flat blade and then I grind a nice bit of a point, I will convert that into another knife because, you know, as an enthusiast of medieval life, you can't have enough weapons. And then we also do a few daft things in the short videos and miming. So yes, Harry, this is about Anglo-Saxon and Viking history. And we've got a lot of videos. I think in the next 2 weeks, we will be publishing our 4,000th video to be, you know, and that's quite amazing, really. And, you know, I'm very prolific. When I'm on the channel, I'm prolific. I can put out a lot of videos because I've got too many videos to put out, but we put out quality content as well. It's not all about the quantity over quality. It's all quantity and quality, the 2 Qs, I call it. And then William says, hi, how do you keep posting so many times a day? It's because I've got so many videos in hand. So I create videos and then I schedule them for the future, and then I build up a schedule. So one of my top tips as a content creator, because what you do not want is burnout, and I've had burnout from this channel. So what happens with burnout, you're working so hard, you're grafting and grafting and grafting, you get to the point when you just need to take a break for a while, and that could be a few days, a few weeks, or even a few months. So what I do generally is that I edit a lot and I build up and schedule videos. So, you know, I probably got probably over 100 to 200 videos in the short format scheduled to go. And I've also got probably 60 to 50, around about 50 to 60 long form videos that at any point I can just make a thumbnail and publish those videos because they're edited. And because I can go out in an afternoon, I can film, you know, easily 10 long form videos and 20 to 30 short videos every time I film. And this is day 5 this week I've been filming. So I build up a lot of content. I've got a lot of content to tell and to record because I do a lot of research. I prepare the videos behind the scenes. This is a job you don't see. So it's not just like the old days where I'll just stand in front of the camera and say, right, today I'm going to talk about a sax, which I can do because I know my history. But so I'm trying to be more structured and be more organised. And then because I got a fantastic brain, allegedly, I can remember everything I published and what I've not published and what I need to publish. I mean, it can be a little bit difficult with the comments, trying to catch up with all the comments. And I was catching up with comments yesterday from 9 months ago, which I've not commented on. So it's a matter of trying to find those videos. And as I'm saying in one of the previous live streams, I could just publish one or 2 short videos a week and 1 long form video a week. But with the amount of content I've got in hand, it will take me 50 years just to deal with what I've got already, let alone what I'll be recording next week in the next few months and this summer. So, you know, and I do have a few big series which I'm working on, like a massive series on how to be a Norse Viking of course, Viking is just technically a job. Even though from the Anglo-Saxon perspective, they describe people as Vikings, but it basically means a river pirate, doesn't it? So on average, I try to post 9 videos a day, and that's, I think, 69 videos a week. It's the only number I know in French, strat on neuf. It's only because I was in the 69th Irish Regiment in the American Civil War, many years ago. And a good regiment they are, and a fantastic history through the American Civil War they had. And all founded with Irish immigrants who came, and that's where the Irish Brigade of the Union came from, because they was all based off Irish immigrants, and a lot of them travelled, a lot of them died in the American Civil War. And also the Confederacy also had their own version, so they had an Irish Brigade as well. And then in 1862, when you have the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Confederates always give the names of the battles a different name, but being a unionist, as in the sense of I was in the Union Army, recreating war, I always know it by the Union name, so Fredericksburg. And so, you got the first day, and the regiments went up against the Confederates on a hill behind a big stone wall. And this stone wall is actually the name where Stonewall Jackson gets his name from, because he became quite a legend at that battle, and then the Confederates called him Stonewall Jackson, and that stuck. And in fact, in Derby, Stonewall Jackson's great-great-granddaughter lives in Derby and has a original painting of him. So so you have, the second day, and the Union were thinking about, well, how are we going to fight this? And they had at hand the Irish Brigade, and they also realised that the Confederates behind this stone wall was the Irish Brigade of the Confederates. So they decided to send the Irish Brigade of the Union to go and fight the Irish Brigade of the Confederate Army. And so, they went over the bridge and they climbed up the hill, and no doubt on the way up, there was probably started off in column. Now in the Civil War, you march in fours, unless you're a sergeant, where you'd be on the side rank on this side, and depending, corporals are always in the column. First sergeants are normally attached to it, and so you form, in a column, and then you go into column, into line. And if you ever seen 1,000 men do this, it's quite a wonderful and amazing thing, where you're taking a column, and every man needs to know his place and where to be, because you start off in twos. Well, actually, you fundamentally in company, you'll start off in a line of one. You say by company into twos, and then and the first thing you do, you number off. So you get the long line of 100 men in a company. They'll go 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, and normally the men will shout it after a command. And then the sergeant or the officer will say, right, by company into twos, and then you form it into a rank of two, and then you number off again 1 2 1 2 1 2. So the ones stay in position and the twos move, and that's how you form a column of four. And then from a column you would be marching over the bridge. You would then make a formation. It's a column into line. And it's quite spectacular. You got to know where your sergeants are, because they're the guides and the flag bearer, to make sure that your line is correctly formed. And then you march up into a long line, 500 wide of men on 2 deep. And you're taking shot and shell and canister, and cannons are flying over with because in the American Civil War, there was quite advanced, because they had cannonballs with a mechanical system in, where you could set the cannonball, and inside the cannonball was all this round shot, and it was on a timer, so they could fire it over the infantry. And because it's on a timer, it wouldn't land in the infantry, it would explode over them, and then all the shrapnel from the cannon and all the little mini balls would just fly and just butcher 30 40 men. So they're taking hits. The Confederates were probably also sniping the officers, because that's what they did, even though that was classed as ungentlemanly warfare. And within that aspect of the 19th century, you're not really meant to take out officers, but the Confederates did this. and then the Union did it in return. And it just became a free-for-all throughout the whole war of taking out the officers. This is why fundamentally officers would take off their bars and the sergeants wouldn't carry stripes on their shoulders, because that's a massive target. And if a Confederate sniper could not actually see, those officers, or know who the officers were, they couldn't fundamentally take them out. And so the Union Brigade of the Irish were marching up, and I told this story a few times, but I used to tell this story to the public when I did the American Civil War reenacting, because it's sort of a harrowing story. And you're getting towards 30 or 40 yards away. You're starting to fire by company. Company load, and you're loading 9 times, and you fire by company, you fire by file. You may fire by front rank and rear rank, because the rear rank will be loading, the front rank will be firing. You're taking hits, men are going down, blood and guts and arms are flying everywhere. But then the Union guys of the Irish Brigade realised that they was fighting the Irish of the Confederates. And they're fundamentally fighting their own relatives, even to the point where they're fighting their own sons and uncles and fathers. And the accounts of the Confederate Irish Brigade and individuals that had the ability to write about it was stating that their men were crying over this, because they knew that they was killing their own kin. So William says, did you know that you have 7 million views? Well, yes, I think we've probably got a few more on that. But technically, because some videos I made last year, which was slightly political, and I won't say much about it, I took them videos down. They're unlisted. But yeah, I mean, I'm heading towards 8 million views, and our views are just going to start going through the roof. And I think this month, in the last 4 weeks, I've done just shy of 800,000. So I think last year we probably did around about 4.5 to 5 million views last year. And then this year it's going to be most probably double that in this year. And then next year it will double again. Because the amazing thing about content creating on YouTube is that, because it's classed as so typically in the world of business, so let's say, you're a plumber and you've got a plumbing business. So you're working under what you call a non-fairable business model. But what does that fundamentally mean? So that means, say for instance, you got Olaf, who's a subscriber, and he runs a plumbing business, or he may be an electrician. Now, if I came up to him and said, right, you're doing a fantastic job, can you double your workload next year? Got a big contract for you. And if he's working on his own, he couldn't do it. He'll have to employ somebody. So there comes a limit when the business model where you just can't keep up with the growth. But on YouTube, content creating is classed as a fairable business model, because your growth can go through the roof, but fundamentally the output on the videos you make don't fundamentally change. Yes, you may concentrate and get a little bit better in the quality, but your amount of work you have to do doesn't fundamentally change. But yet you suddenly find that you've published 1,000 videos, your channel takes off, and then over the next year you got 500% growth. And then what happens then? It just keeps snowballing. But imagine you're a successful YouTuber, you've got 1 million subscribers, you're earning £5,000 to £10,000 a week, and your channel doubles in the percentage rate it grows. Well, in theory, so does the revenue. So yeah. We have a comment here from Roger Hamas and Ruffas 39. He says, makes me happy to see you are a polytheist. I have my own group that focus on Nordic Bronze Age, and we use older proto-Germanic names for the god like Wodenas and Tiras and Thunlas, etc. and are animists. Well, yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I take a little bit of all sorts within my faith. So I do also practice shamanism, but I try to practice Norse shamanism from the Nordic world. But because we don't know a lot about that, I've taken and read about shamanism from different cultures. And because it's so connected, no matter where you are in the world within that shamanic viewpoint. So I also add that to my faith and what I do. But it doesn't really matter who you worship, where I see it, as long as you practice goodness and kindness. Because if you practice those two things, then that's what makes you a great human being. Because being kind and being good are wonderful aspects of human nature. And being the opposite, so there you are, you practice goodness and kindness, you don't get me wrong, you don't suffer fools gladly because you're aware of the world we live in, but you generally show goodness and kindness. For instance, if you see somebody that's struggling, you would go up and you try to help them. And on the other hand, if you go on the other route and you go down the route of, let's say, practicing hatred and anger, those have a price. Goodness and kindness don't have a price. Anger and hatred and those aspects of human nature have a price. So I think it's better to be good and kind. Plus, also, when you practice these sort of things, you get better results because you're in the old, everything's connected by energy. Literally everything is energy, isn't it, really? So within this whole structure of energy, if you practice those things, it echoes and it ripples out and you get good results. It's a bit like the old story, let's say you have two Saxons and they both decide to move from their town and go to live in Jorvik, for instance, or Eothric back in the Saxon times. But one of them is very positive, always sees the positive, always grabs the positive, and the other one is a very negative person. So who's going to have the good time and who's not going to have the good time? So the way we think and the way we transcend our thinking into what we do, it really does have a massive aspect on the life. So for instance, tomorrow, if you start, seeing the goodness and the kindness side of things, then you're going to get better results in life. And then we have a comment here from Cameron Abel, said, preach. Well, I won't say I'm a preacher. And, not like my old friend Moses, who used to preach. It was hence why we called him and nicknamed him Moses, and that name stuck because he used to just carry on and moan about everything to us. And I don't know where he is in the world. Been a long time since I've seen him. But what's the most important thing is that you believe in something. You don't have to believe what I believe, because I want you to believe what you believe. And you could, whether you worship and believe in God or no God, whether you may think that Jesus is an alien, whatever you practice and you believe in, go for it. As long as it's not bad and evil and not wicked, and also you practice those two aspects of goodness and kindness, then you're going to have a great time. And laughing is such a wonderful thing as well. And it's true. There's no better medicine than laughter. And you see me in the life. I'm always laughing because I'm a very laughable individual. I watch my videos when I'm edit, and I have to stop some days because I'm laughing so much at myself. So do you have any questions or any more comments? Let me know as I drink my cup of tea. What are you drinking and where are you from? I'm always curious to know where people are from. And I know William is from the Faroe Islands, so you'll be called a Faroesian, I suppose. And then today I was watching a video about the Goths and the Visigoths. Oh no, boy, they didn't ask travel, did they? Yes, we have a comment here. So I like the thumbnails that doesn't have many things on them, because sometimes I get overwhelmed by all things. Yeah, I mean, I've been practicing with my thumbnails and making better short thumbnails and long form thumbnails. And sometimes I use Gemini, but Gemini sometimes goes way over the top and there'll be like 20 words in a thumbnail. And I'm like, it's too much for me. So I have to go back into ChatGPT and calm those thumbnails down. So I think you could probably tell the difference between the Gemini thumbnails and the ChatGPT thumbnails, because I'm not great at making thumbnails, and I never have been. But a thumbnail has to have a psychological reaction, very much like a shorts video. This is one of the things, I've very recently developed a load of short videos which are not recorded yet, but they're going to hit on a very much a psychological level, because it's all about psychology and what you call cognitive dissonance, which has been quite a popular word over the last few years. So not only does the title have to hit you on a psychological level where it makes you think, oh, what's this video about? I want to watch it. But the thumbnail also has to do the same thing. But the thumbnail needs to fundamentally not be too overwhelming and tell a story. And so sometimes when I make thumbnails through Gemini, and the ones I made today, I couldn't make through Gemini because she was struggling, or the app was. So I used ChatGPT for the short videos that are being published tonight, as we've got one out at 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 o'clock tonight. And then that's my editing video for today. And then I'll go and start again for tomorrow. If I don't, unless I use videos I've already got in hand. And then a lot of the thumbnails where I had text in a red box or a yellow box is done through YouTube. It's a new feature, but there's just not enough in that new feature. You can't add an arrow, you can't add a red circle, and sometimes you really got to think about your thumbnails. I've made so many mistakes with my thumbnails, like when I made a load of AI last year. At the time, they was kind of all right, but now on reflection, I've got rid of a lot of them, and I'm getting rid of the rest, and I'm going back to the original video and taking a frame and then using that as a basis of the thumbnail. Because if I've got a video and it's got some completely made up AI thing on it, it doesn't really relate to the video. Yes, the subtitle, the titles and the text may. So I'm going back to the original video frame, so that when you can see a video, you know that I'm in it, or Egor and me are in the video, or Tirk here. So let's just go back to your comment. So Commandable. So I do need to get glasses. What do you think of the Voynich manuscripts? I'm from Washington, occupied Turtle Island. Well, it's not something I know a lot about, to be honest. So I couldn't really give you an opinion on the Voynich manuscripts. So you have to remind me what they're about. I've probably heard about them. I've probably looked at them in the past, but to be fair, there's a hell of a lot of manuscripts still left over. And I do know quite a few are in America. And then we have a comment here from Roger Helmaz, Said and Wolf as 39. So, any advice on Nordic shamanism, or good sources or books? Love your channel. Yeah, I mean, one of the aspects about Nordic shamanism is that really there isn't really many sources, because most of the sources, anything that was written down, in this period of history and later in the 11th and 12th, 13th century, will probably have been gotten rid of because it will be classed as heresy. So we have lost a lot of information. And most probably by the time you get to the beginning of the Viking Age, it wasn't very much practiced anymore. Maybe in some of the more Slavic countries where shamanism survived. So what you have to do as somebody into shamanism, you have to look at different sources. So there's a really good book on Irish shamanism and ancient Celtic shamanism by DJ Conway, who was an excellent writer. And I think the book is called Earth, Wind and Fire, if I recall. That's a really good book. And then I also read quite a lot about Polynesian shamanism, which I know is massively far away in distance when it comes to Nordic and European shamanism. But yet, because shamanism all kind of developed across the world at the same time, it has those similarities because of the fact that the knowledge comes from spirits and they talk to the plants and they learned how to talk, and this is what gave us the beginning of humanity, to be able to talk, to sing, to to play a drum, to hunt, to learn what plants would help us. Because it's so far disconnected from the modern world, where if you said, "Oh, I went out in my garden today and had a good chat with a tree," most people will think you're probably mad, and your doctor would try to put you in a hospital. But yet, animals and trees have spirits, because everything is energy. We're energy. Everything around me is energy. It's just that my tunic is vibrating at a different energy level than what I am, and that is why it doesn't merge into my body and we become one. So DJ Conway definitely wrote some very good books. He also wrote a book, and I think it's a guy, on Norse shamanism. And there's a very good Icelandic channel that goes into the pre-culture of Iceland, and also, it talks about the pre-Christian culture. It's also about Scandinavian magic, the Sidri, for instance. It's not something I know a great deal about. And, it's been a long time since I've read any books on shamanism. And so whenever I saw one, he used to pick it up, I give it a read, and then I take what I wanted from the knowledge to add to my own. So I made a kind of a hybrid form of shamanism. And then there's also a writer. So the guy that I read about Polynesian shamanism is a guy called Dr. King. I think it's called Sergey is first name, I swear to you, and he wrote a very good book called Urban Shaman, which I really thoroughly enjoyed, and just some of the concepts of that are quite fascinating. But it's something I'll have to try to get into again, and then probably look at, because I don't know what's been published over the last 20 years, so there may be some better books now with more information. Because you can only gain so much information from the archaeology, and you can only gain so much information from any written and illustrated text or illustrations on jewelry and so forth. So because of that, and because the shamanic side of things will be passed down from mother to daughter and father to son, a lot of that information has gone. But if you go to some of the Slavic countries, and you go to like Siberia, where you still have practicing shamans, then that kind of gives you a cultural look at what shamanism is like today and what it was like in the past. And that is also fundamentally, a connection to the European form of shamanism. And of course, you also have Druidism, of course, which is more the ancient practice, and which I did practice at one point, but it wasn't really for me. I met some really fascinating Druids, and the knowledge they had is incredible. So again, I think there's a couple of books by DJ Conway on Druidism as well. And I guess it's a form of practice of shamanism, but it's a concept within its own right, isn't it? Because, you talk about some of the written accounts from the Romans, and they talk about how the Druids had the ability to use magic to alter weather. That would be one of the aspects which they will specialise in. And then within the shamanic world, people always claim that they had the ability to transform themselves into an animal, which is where a lot of these folklores and myths. So you also got to look at the folklore and also the myths and the folk tales, because they also, to a certain degree, give you an insight. But of course, when you get an original story from 3,000 years ago, and it's passed down and told and written down and rewritten down, the original story will be far different from the end result. A bit like Chinese whispers is the old saying, isn't it? But I wonder where that comes from, the word Chinese whisper, where you tell us, you say a line or something, and by the time you go past 30 people, which is true on a psychological level, if you told, if 30 people had to line up and you gave instructions to the first person, by the time it got to the last person, it will be completely different instructions, and they will, they may have the core information, but they will be changed. So I'll have to do some research and probably make a video to give you some context of some of the sources about the more Nordic style, practice of shamanism, because it was practiced probably more in the classical Scandinavian Bronze Age and going back even further to the Stone Age and the Neolithic. Because it's so far back in history, we have lost so much information. And of course, the church didn't like such things. You know, this is why we've lost some of the sagas, because they would have been undoubtedly burnt if you know, and depending on the individual, but I'm certain some individuals from the church would have saw it as a fascinating piece of history and saved it, whereas others would have said, "Oh, that's heresy, must be burned." But when we burn books, and you know, you've only got to think about the Nazis, how they had the massive book burnings. You're burning history, and that's censorship and add towards the propaganda of controlling people. And I know Eggle, when he knew a little bit more on the subject than I did. But thank you for loving the channel. I do hope we please and you know, we do please everybody with the content we put out. Tonight's videos are mostly funny miming videos. Some of the videos are old videos I've remastered, because back in the day when I first started, I didn't really have the ability to edit videos, so it will just be a simple cut at the beginning, cut at the end. But you know, and I couldn't watch the videos in the editor because they'll be too slow when speaking, so it was impossible to cut for the first 2 or 3 years until probably 2019 when I got, or 2020. I think it was 2019 or 2020 when I went out and I spent like £1,000 and I bought a PC, which is slightly getting outdated now, but it's still okay for my editing. So I went out and specifically went and made a PC with the most highest gigabyte of RAM, so that I can run the software which I use. DaVinci Resolve is the editor I use most of the time, unless I'm doing it on my phone, and then I'll be using YouTube Create. But I kind of gone away from YouTube Create because on one hand I like it, but the other hand it's still very outdated, and so I try to use DaVinci Resolve. And I'm not a brilliant editor. I'm sure if I gave somebody one of our videos, they could do a lot more than what I can with the content, you know, because I'm self-taught, but I also like and I've always liked the simplistic way of editing and telling the tales. And don't forget, for the majority of the time, most of our videos have never had a script. So if I had Eggle here, I would say, right, Eggle, let's make a video about the Sax. You know, we'd have no hook. We'd have no concept of a title. There'd be no concept of a thumbnail. They all came post-edit. So he'll sit down and he'll talk for 5 minutes, and hopefully more than 8 minutes, and talk about, you know, this knife, for instance. So for the majority of the history of the channel, that is the way we film things. You know, for the first time really this year, I'm now preparing videos with a title in mind already and a thumbnail in mind, a short description so I know what the video is about for my mind, but I'm not fundamentally using scripts. The minimum I'll have is probably just a list of keywords. It's just that if I'm making a video about a knife, I'm not going to be repeating myself, so I know that I can go from one subject from it to another subject to another subject, and try to have within those videos I've been doing recently more control over what I say and the order I say it. Or else, you know, I'll be talking about a knife, and then 3 minutes down the line, I'll remember something I wish I said earlier. Oh yeah, we go back to the construction. So I try to, you know, get the construction first, the history of it, the construction, what's it made out of, how did they make it back in the day, the archaeological resources, what is it used for, what sort of person would own a knife like this, and then talk about my history with this knife, because they all got a history. Now some of them, like this knife, is probably 3 or 4 years old, and for this knife I've owned for 25 years. So some of them have been around a while, and some of them are quite new. I mean, and there's other examples of that on the table when I find them. Where are you? Come on. So like this one here, that's a relatively new blade in my collection. It was upside down. It does have a nice little groove, which you don't always get on a Langsax. And I think that's more design than a practical element of having a groove in it. It just breaks up the knife a little bit. So this one, you know, I've owned for 18 months. And then this one, which goes with this knife. So this knife and that knife and this one here all go together because they all belong to my friend Rolf, who gave them to me many years ago. So they have a massive sentimental meaning to me. I mean, I wouldn't, you could offer me £1,000, I wouldn't sell it because the sentimental value vastly outweighs any monetary value you could offer me. And then there's other knives. Let's have a look. I mean, for this one, I probably have had for about 8 or 9 years. This was a broken sword, which I decided just to round the end off on purpose for a video. And then it also has the actual correct way of fastening the tang. So on a lot of modern reenactment swords, the tang goes through, but it shouldn't. So it's a blind tang. So the tang will finish here, but how it's fastened together is it's riveted on. So these are rivets. And I was looking at it again today. And then I saw a Todd Cutler video from yesterday talking about a Peterson Type S #2 on the other scale. I can't remember. I'm not vastly massive when it comes to the Peterson types of sword. It's something I really got to teach myself. But he was talking about the correct way of how they would fasten a pommel onto the tang. So this aspect here would have two kind of bars sticking up, and then this section and this section with the tang are riveted together, and that's what firms them really solid, and that's a really correct way of having a sword. But I don't have enough, but I do have a lot compared to the average reenactor. But I guess most reenactors will probably have maybe one sword or two swords. They may have a couple of axes and 2 or 3 spears if they're lucky, and a shield. Whereas I've got half a dozen shields, more than a dozen spears, more than a dozen axes, more than a dozen, swords, and God knows how many, or by the gods, how many knives I own. But yes. So do you have any more lovely comments? Is there anything you want to ask me before I go and get my dinner? Because I'm hungry and I got some half-burnt sausages to eat. Yeah, typical of that. I'm so rubbish at cooking food. I get distracted, that's why. But it's nice to do these live streams again. So I'm going to try to do one every day if I can. But I will get days when I'm busy or out. And I sometimes go to the pub on a Sunday night. So I was going to go last night, but it was a bit too cold in my house, and I decided to wrap up warm and climb into my lovely bed. We've still got 2 duvets on from winter. So sometimes on a Sunday I go down my local pub. If you're from Derby and you know the Abbey, everybody knows me down there as Andy the Viking. Oh, it's Andy the Viking's in again. You can definitely hear me because I'm very loud. I might go down later on, or I might not. And then I think about tomorrow, which I'll be doing some more filming, hopefully. I'll do some more editing to get some more videos in hand, because on the downside, when you do publish a lot of content, I've also got to edit a lot of content to keep the content up. Because what I don't want to do is burn myself out and then not have a reserve of videos in hand. So that's why I always recommend, as a content creator, you build up a reserve, a month's worth, a few weeks worth, even a week's worth. If you want a week off, you can schedule those videos, make sure you got the thumbnails and the SEO done, and then you can say to yourself, right, I'm having a week off. I don't need to worry about the channel. I've got, 5 videos ready to go, or in this case, nearly 70 a week. But it's also about the numbers game as well, because the more content I put out, the better YouTube understands the channel. This is why we're growing. This is why we'll in a few weeks, I'll probably predict we're doing 1 million views a month, is what I'm predicting. And then over the next year, that will double. And then before I know it, we'll have 100,000 subs, and the channel will blow up. On one aspect, I'd like that to happen, but on the other aspect, I don't, because when you get to the point when you get too big, you can't deal with all the comments on the live stream. So when it's nice when you got 7 guys on the live stream, and let's not forget the ladies as well, that's great, because I can read all your comments. But when I have 500 people in a live stream and the comments are going that fast, I can't read them unless you send a super chat to actually highlight a comment. And because I don't have 3,000 hours yet, not far off, I can't get super chats. Ah, very nice. Yeah, and I put out 2 long form videos today. There's a very old comments video. I can't remember when it's from, but I found it on my PC. So I thought, oh, I'll edit that and I'll publish it tonight. So you never know, you could be one of the commenters from the past that I've read a comment on. And I did film one yesterday, and that was about 50 minutes long. So I've got to edit that for this week as well. So because I want to try to get the comments reading videos out as soon as I can after the comments are being published. But I do like those videos, and then at some point I'll go through those videos, and when I get an interesting comment where I talk about an historical side of things, well, fundamentally I can make a video out of that. There's a guy out on YouTube from Mythbusters. What's his name? Savage. Is it Savage? He does that in his live streams. He'll do a live stream. He'll answer people's comments and make videos out of those comments. And I really love that channel. But I'm not very good at names. It'll come back to me when I don't need to know. Is it Adam Savage? Yeah. He's got a really nice workshop. I wish I had one of them. That's what I'm aiming for, to have a really nice workshop. So I can go in, if I'm not filming, I can go and make a sword or make a knife or get on my forge and forge something and practice a bit of experimental archaeology. So let's just refresh it and make sure we're not missed. Oh no, wait a minute. I'll just show you the opposite side of the room there. I thought that was me refreshing the comments. You can just see my big rack of medieval clothes. It's a bit of a mess actually, because I've been filming so much this week. I just throw stuff on the floor. I think, oh, I'll deal with it later on. I'll put it all away. Because beforehand, in the old days, when I used to film upstairs, I had all my clothes in the cupboard. So when I wanted a certain medieval clothing out, I had to search for it. So I've now got this nice clothing rail system, and I'm having them all hung up so I can say, right, today I'm wearing this. I'm going to wear that with it, and then every time I film, I look different, because then it breaks up the thumbnails. If I had one set of clothes, I'd be wearing the same things throughout all of the videos, and that's one thing I never wanted to do. I mean, that's why, I've gone and made hats, and it's got a nice couple of brooches on it. I think that one there is probably more authentic. That's more of a modern reproduction of one, but they're quite nice. And then at some point, when I've got the money to invest in some wool, then I might start thinking about making hats. Maybe give some away on the channel. Maybe sell a few if anybody wants to buy a hat that's associated with Northworthy. Because I do like making hats. And again, I'm happy to provide and help with, if you're, for instance, a medieval group or you're starting out and you want to know, well, how do you make that hat? Do you have the pattern? Then I will gladly give you the pattern. We typically call this the Burka hat, but I don't know whether that's true, because I've seen other names for it as well, but I can't remember. Then there's that classic video in the short where Eggle's wearing this hat, because I made it for me, but I then ended up giving it to Eggle to wear because he really liked it. He loved the colour red. So this was technically the hat Eggle wore in a lot of videos. Do you have any more comments? Any more questions? Yes, trying to see. Oh, not down there. I've got a bottle of wine, a bottle of cider. Let's see what's on my floor around me. Yes, so I will have a look at doing a video on Nordic shamanism for you. Just bear that in mind. I'll write it on my board when I go upstairs, and then I'll do a bit of research and get some sources and look for some books. But I wish I knew a little bit more. But then also within that whole aspect of, let's say, shamanism and witchcraft, sometimes you don't want to, you may be a hedge witch, or you may be a practicing solo shaman. So, and you may have knowledge that's been passed down, but you can't always pass that knowledge on as well. Very much the case with hedge witches. My friend was a hedge witch, and he learnt that from his mother and dad, who were both hedge witches. And I said, well, what can you teach me about it? He said, well, I can't really teach you unless you become a hedge witch, and then you become my apprentice. Then I can teach you. And that's in the one hand I can understand, but the other hand it's slightly frustrated because if when we limit the information we can pass down, then we're going to lose a lot of information. Let's drink some more tea before it goes cold. It's still just slightly warm. So I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to end the live stream because I've got some more things to do and I want to go out to my local pub and catch up with my friends. So I'm going to try to do a live stream tomorrow night. If I'm filming, I'll try to do it at 6 o'clock. But generally, when I'm filming, if I start in the afternoon, then I like to take advantage of the daylight as much as possible. So we'll see what time I can do it tomorrow. And it depends on the weather. I was going to film this afternoon, but it rained all afternoon. It was miserable outside. And I didn't quite fancy getting wet. But then I can go and film some more videos and get my dinner. But thank you very much for watching my live stream. If you've got any suggestions what you want to see live streams on, then do leave in the comments. If you got this far after the live stream has ended and you watched it all the way through, then you're awesome. You really are. You're an amazing individual. And thank you. And don't forget to make sure you are subscribed, because only 18% of our audience is subscribed to the channel. It may be slightly high, but I know last time I looked a few weeks back, it was 18%. And that's quite low, to be fair, I think. But then again, a lot of channels have that problem. It's like the Diary of the CEO, a channel I watch, very good channel, big channel. But he has the same problem where a lot of his audience aren't subscribed. But I don't think he understands the fact that a lot of people may not have a YouTube subscription, because you can certainly watch YouTube without having a subscription and having joined. But it does help if you do join. And I've not long had a bath, so my hair's all wet. That's one thing I don't have, is a authentic Anglo-Saxon or Viking bone comb. If anybody makes one and would like to send one for free, or anything, if you manufacture things, if you make helmets or you make leather work and you like to see us review it, then we would give you a good review. And I'm fairly certain, because there's such a thirst for people wanting to buy authentic kit, those videos would help your business and we would give a positive review. But not just that, I'd also support you as a business by giving you advice on the authenticity, because that's certainly something I'll be doing in the future, is offering my service to the movie and the film industry as being a consultant when it comes to authenticity, because they get so many things wrong. And it's a shame, like the poems like the Vikings or the Last Kingdom, they've probably got consultants working for them, but they're probably not as educated and not lived the life. You can read all the books, but until you've actually dressed up, until you've been and gone reenacted for many years and been to castles and stayed in long houses and Anglo-Saxon halls, then you're not going to have that experience. And I'd like to see one day Hollywood make a really authentic version of the Vikings, and not with all the leather Farby kit. I mean, when I say Farby, it's just a modern reenactment term, and it stands for far be it from the war. And so, other words, it's like going to an American Civil War, Civil War event, and you've got a AK-47 or an M16, or even worse, as a Viking, you come along and you got a grenade launcher. They didn't have it, and you do get some people with funny ideas when it comes to reenactment and what's authentic and what's not authentic. But I try and I use guides from societies. So when I was in Regia and Glorum, very good society, very keyed up on the authenticity, I use those guides to guide what I wear so that I know what's correct and what's not correct. And because I've been doing it for 30 years, since 1993, and I've been everything from a training officer to a non-commissioned officer within societies, I've got the experience of commanding a lot of men, and men that would be much older than me, men that would have served in the army, and because a lot of ex-military people like reenactment, especially when it comes to the later eras, because it's military based. If you spent 10 years or 20 years in the army marching around, I noticed one thing I've not done is connect my battery pack. That's a good job. Then you would, you can see why ex-military people like to come and join reenactment, because it's a lifestyle they get used to. I mean, it sounds slightly daft, but they get used to being given orders. And certainly, I was talking to a guy last week whose uncle was in the army for 36 years. Could you imagine spending 36 years of your life in the military? I mean, I think that's pretty amazing. I mean, my uncle, or my auntie's husband, uncle-in-law, I guess, he spent 27 years in the tank corps in the British Army, and I find that amazing. He was a regimental sergeant major, which is a very highly respected rank in the military. You're not like an officer, but it's a very highly respected position to have. And the Scroddies would see that sort of a person as their father figure in many aspects, because that's the person they looked up to. And within the military side of things, you're not just dealing with military side of things, you're also dealing with individuals' problems, maybe they're having marriage problems and so forth. So there's a lot of things you have to deal with within this military side of things. And I know this not only from experience, but because I've had lots of friends in the military. But yes, so I'm glad you like this live stream. I've got to go soon, but my battery's about to run out because I didn't connect my battery to my battery pack. So I'm on 7%, and it will soon go. So it's another mistake I've made, but you're only good as your last job. And if you never made a mistake in your life, then you practically haven't done anything. So you make a mistake, you learn from the mistake, and then when you come to be in a situation again, because you've learned, so never see a mistake as a bad thing, because when somebody fails, they're not failing. Yes, they failed, but at the same time, they're learning from the failure. So when they have another go, so let's say you're a hobbyist blacksmith, and you managed to get yourself a little working forge in your garden, and you're excited, you got yourself a bit of metal, and you think, I'm going to make a knife. And you put the metal in the forge, and you get distracted, and you come away and you put it out the tongs, and you just realize, half my metal's gone. Start again. So that's the first mistake you learn, that when you put something in a hot forge, to keep an eye on it and don't leave it in too long, because it's so quick to burn away a bit of metal in a forge when it's over 1,000 degrees. Well, I've done that myself, but you can always tell when the metal is getting too hot, because it starts to spark, and you can tell, and you get that experience. So you have another go, and you learn the lesson from the first lesson, and you manage to actually try to craft a knife. But as you're making it, because you may not have had it hot enough, it cracks and it breaks. So you got to try again. So you failed on 2 occasions, but you take the positive out of that failure. You see it as a way to teach and learn yourself that when you have another go, that that you've already made 2 mistakes, but you take the positive out of that failure, and then the end result down the line will be this amazing knife you've made. and and it ends up looking like this, and you say to yourself, yeah, it took a few trials and errors. I failed for a few times. I learned from those failures. So a failure isn't fundamentally a failure. A failure is an opportunity to learn how to do things better the next time. And when you adapt as a human being, because I do like to think that I'm quite wise. I make mistakes all the time, and it's like one thing I do. So one little lesson I could teach you. So how many times have we all made a mistake? You're let's say you're carving a spoon with an axe, and you suddenly chop your spoon in half, and you completely ruin the item. What do we do as human beings when we make a mistake? Now, so imagine you're working with a hammer and you hit your thumb with a hammer. This is the same situation. You're going to go and swear to yourself, aren't you? You're going to go, oh, effing old, you stupid idiot. And a lot of people do that, don't they? I did it for many years. But then one day I learnt the trick of not saying that. So, if I'm working this spoon and I'm not looking, and I'm working my axe, and I go too deep and I chop the handle in half and ruins what I'm making, so it's no good, I go to myself, well, next time, and I say it out loud because it's on a psychological level what I'm doing. When I say next time, I will do things better. Because when you make that mistake, when you don't shout out and call yourself an idiot, your subconscious and your whole psyche and your brain learns that when you say to yourself, oh, next time I will do things better, I will learn not to make that mistake. You're taking that whole emphasis of the mistake and the psychological reaction, you're changing. And therefore, what happens when you get to the next situation when you're making a spoon, you remember, oh, yeah, this time I must remember. And you'll be doing this on a subconscious level, equally as on a conscious level, that, yeah, I'm going to really concentrate this time on with my axe. And, you may get your knife out, and, I can start working this now on camera. So, and you learn over the years, you trust yourself and you trust your knife. So on this aspect of this spoon, I need to shorten it, but I need to round the end. So because I've got that experience, because I know myself, I know I'm not going to cut myself, and I have done quite a few times in the past, not for a long time. So I may start to, work a bit of the body. Now, if you ever work in a knife this way, that's wrong. You should always have the knife and work away, because when you start working in and you're not careful, the next minute you just stab yourself in the chest, and then that's never a good thing. But at the same time, it's slightly difficult talking on camera and working wood. Then what happens, they end up, because most normal people don't do woodwork in their house, but I do. I was talking to my friend Adi and said, if I had my way, Adrian, I'll have a lathe over there in my lounge, I'll have a little workshop in my dining room, because I don't need the rooms in my house to be conventional rooms, because I'm just not normal in that sense. But because I like crafting things, and because I really want to get back into crafting, to reteach myself, but also then I can record videos where I make a spoon and I make an axe handle, then those are the sort of things I like to do. But this is quite a bit and a far away yet before it's going to be finished, and then you have to correct yourself, make sure that you're not, and I don't know whether it's the best bit of wood. And if you are working closely, just take little cuts. So and then you end up with shavings all over the place. But that's a video and a story for another day. And now that we got to 90 minutes, this is the time when I say goodbye, because I've seen a couple of text messages, and one of them is somebody saying, oh, you're going down the pub in a bit, which this one might do, because I like my beer and it's nice to get out of the house. So until we meet again, in another live stream. I am forever your host. I am the content creator behind Northworthy. I am the man, the Viking, the Norse warrior that wears many, many hats. And I will see you in the next video and the next live stream. Goodbye. Fare thee well and have a lovely week ahead. Goodbye.